Hi, everybody. It's me, Todd. Hi. How's it going? I wanted to read to you um, something that I've been developing now for a few months, actually, probably over the course of my career as an educator, and trying to put my thoughts and coalesce a bunch of really kind of disparate ideas and themes and putting them together into one attempt at a cohesive statement on what I think needs to happen in terms of public schools. Terence McKenna, think what you will about him, but he said some really interesting things. One of the things he said was that the ego is a maladaptive tumor-like growth that has been inculcated into you by the toxicity of culture. It is literally the response to toxic culture. The more toxic the culture, the more the ego is revered as a natural value within that culture. My thesis here is that our culture has become toxic. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, and I don't mean that to say that in a way that like I've risen above it or figured out how not to be a part of that toxicity. That toxicity is a part of me, and it's a part of what I've taught my children even. And it's something now that as I get older, I continue to, my eyes are, I think, opened wider, and I'm starting to see that toxicity, and we kind of work around the fringes of it, but we have not really ever addressed it head on and really identified what that toxicity is. So that this video is an attempt to explain why I think our culture is toxic and how schools reinforce that toxicity, and how we can possibly find an antidote to that toxicity, remove it, and then move on to a better system of education and politics and economics. So one of the things that I wrote as I was thinking about this, I'm just going to read some things that I wrote, and then I'll talk about it more off the cuff. But I wrote this. I said, wrapped up within the context of our busy lives, it is often repressed, but it's always there. It manifests as anxiety, sadness, anger, or disillusionment. So we mask it with technology, entertainment, sports, alcohol, sex, or drugs. For some, it's so consuming that there's never conscious recognition of it, but it is there. And what's there is that we're out of alignment. It starts with our strong identification with and attachment to our egos. We are taught to build egos layer by layer. We are assigned a name at birth, a gender or race, a nationality, in many cases a religion. In school, we add additional layers: smart, stupid, athletic, clumsy, well-behaved, troubled, etc. Lost in ego, we seek relationships, start families, build careers, and crave validation. Collectively, we build school systems, political parties, governments, businesses, churches, economies, countries, and other social institutions. We cement our egos as we cling to these collective identities. So we have our personal identities, and then we have these collective identities. All of this is so immersive that we don't even recognize it as anything foreign. This ego construction has become the substrate upon which we organize our lives, including our schools. In America in particular, we have a hyper-capitalist form of economics. And that hyper-capitalism, where every person is valued as a consumer, represents the height of that disease or toxicity. But we're so caught up in the system that we misdiagnose the root of the cause of the disease. We treat the symptoms with Xanax, with Adderall, antidepressants, alcohol, and other drugs. We develop technology to help us keep up. But paradoxically, that technology has made us more rushed, more compressed, and more overwhelmed. Our central nervous system, built for a far slower world, can't evolve fast enough to keep pace. There seems to be no way to stop or even slow down. So a lot of people call this, getting caught up in the rat race. We're caught up in competing with other countries. We're caught in the United States with competing with other states, with other counties, with other school districts. We're caught in this competitive environment. And the question is never, what's wrong with this environment? It's like the only question is, how do we improve our place? Whether you're in a school district that wants to have a higher report card score and wants to have higher test scores, whether you're a state who's looking to try to move up the rankings, or you look at yourself as a country trying to beat out your international peers. We just look for ways to climb that ladder, never questioning why we're on that ladder in the first place. And a lot of this, I think, boils down to the economic system that we have developed. There was an article, and it was written by Jason Hickel and Martin Kirk, and they explore this topic a little bit. And the article is entitled, "Are You Ready to Consider That Capitalism is the Real Problem?" They write, "Why do people feel this way? Probably not because they deny the abundant material benefits of modern life that many are able to enjoy, or because they want to travel back in time and live in the Soviet Union. It's because they realize either consciously or at some gut level that there's something fundamentally flawed about a system that has a prime directive to churn nature and humans into capital, and do it more and more each year, regardless of the costs to human well-being and to the environment we depend upon." They continue, "What becomes clear here is that ours is a system that is programmed to subordinate life to the imperative of profit. It all proceeds from the same deep logic. It's the same logic that sold lives for profit in the Atlantic slave trade. It's the logic that gives us sweatshops and oil spills, and it's the logic that is right now pushing us headlong toward ecological collapse and climate change." Again, that's from Hickel and Kirk's article, "Are You Ready to Consider That Capitalism is the Real Problem?" So individually, we are out of alignment. Collectively, we are out of alignment, and it becomes clearer each day that the entire planet is out of alignment, and it's unsustainable. Now, I realize the risk of criticizing capitalism in a world that views the economic system as binary. Either you're a capitalist or you're a communist. And that seems to be the way a lot of people want to view economic systems. And I realize that a critique of capitalism will automatically define me as a socialist or a communist. And because so many are programmed to conflate socialism with its totalitarian forms. So as soon as you talk about anything that sounds socialist, people will automatically say, well, it didn't work in the Soviet Union, it's not working in Venezuela, or whatever. They'll bring up these examples. And the conversation gets closed down before we can even begin to really have a conversation. But if you're still listening, maybe we can press forward without an automatic presumption and talk about this. Karl Marx, say what you will about him, but he wrote some really interesting ideas down. And he described much of what I'm getting at here in his theory of alienation. In this theory, he describes alienation from our species essence. This species essence, or I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but it's Gattungswesen or something like that. But this species essence of an individual, it comprises all of his or her innate potentials. Now, under a capitalist mode of production, an individual loses identity and the opportunity for self-development as he or she is forced to sell his or her labor power as a market commodity. That's what Marx wrote, is that under capitalism, the individual loses identity and the opportunity for self-development as he or she is forced to sell his or her labor power as a market commodity. I would suggest to you that the root cause of why students don't like school in general, and why it's very difficult for us to recruit human beings into the teaching profession and retain them there is because the process of public education is driven by this capitalist mode of production. We've got to produce people who are trained and can work and become part of this capitalist economy. And in doing so, our students lose their identity. They lose their opportunity for self-development. And I'm not talking about self-development as an entity for creating wealth or being able to buy things. I'm talking self-development in a much deeper sense. They sacrifice that. They lose that capacity for self-development because they are forced to sell their lives, their time, to capitalist ventures. So they're selling their labor as a market commodity. And that labor power, depending on what they choose to do, if it's rare and it's difficult, they're going to get more compensation. They're going to get more money. If it's not rare, they're going to get less money. So you have some folks out there who work for minimum wage and other folks out there who work for millions of dollars a year. But all students in one form or another are seen in this society as potential units to plug somewhere into the capitalist system. And that the primary purpose of school then becomes, how do we prepare this particular student to be college or career ready? Career ready means to plug into this capitalist system immediately after high school or after just some short training. College ready means we just need to put you in school for 4 or 5 more years to add additional layers of information and training so that then we can plug you somewhere into this capitalist system. But nowhere other than through lip service do we actually embed into public schools in a meaningful way things that provide true self-development. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about the capacity to be happy, the capacity to cooperate, to love, to have compassion for others, to be mentally well, to be self-actualized, as Maslow would say. What are we doing in schools about those things? Now, I know plenty of amazing teachers who are doing their best to embed that into their classrooms, and they do that. But what is the school measured by? How is success defined when we look at it district by district, when we measure school by school, district by district, state by state, nation by nation? Are we looking at those things that I just mentioned, or are we looking at the acquisition of the types of skills that students need to have to thrive in a capitalist system? And my argument would be that if we look at standardized testing and we look at what's measured on it and what politicians and society at large defines as success for a school, what you find there is not self-actualization stuff. You find stuff that is useful in creating workers to fit into a capitalist society. And we do all of this in service to our ego. And as McKenna reveals, the toxicity of our culture, it's our ego that winds up being most revered. The ego is what we encourage students to develop through the acquisition of material goods, through the consumption of material things. So we whether it's implied or explicit, we are teaching students that their value comes through getting an education that provides them the capacity to make the most money, so then they can go out and consume the best stuff and have it, and that's what makes them great. That's what makes them valuable. That's what gives them worth. That's what gives their life meaning. And we all know, because we have that sense of misalignment, that this isn't right. Teachers know this, the students know this, and we all feel that it's just not right. And yet we get so caught up in the game that we just go ahead and play it. And I wrote that most of us, including me, are so caught up in the system, so alienated from nature and from ourselves, so far from what Marx called our species essence, that we have become conditioned to accept our objectification and powerlessness. We sense that misalignment. We sense it in our public schools, in our workplaces, in our government, our society at large. We attempt to distract ourselves from this misalignment with sports, movies, streaming stuff on Netflix, drinking, drugs, social media scrolling. But we know it's there. It's always there. And since self-actualization was never fostered within us, we have no clue how to deconstruct the system that traps us. We have no idea how. We don't even think that we could dismantle it and rebuild something new. So how do we change this? How do we transform society to become realigned, reacquainted with our species essence, and self-actualized? I believe it starts with deleting our current system of education and installing a new operating system. This isn't time for minor little upgrades. And you've had an operating system before. You've seen Windows go from different versions, and sometimes it's like instead of going from 1.0 to 2.0, you go from 1.1 to like 1.0 to 1.1. What I'm talking about is just a completely new way of viewing education. But in order to do that, it requires courage, and it requires teachers or educators everywhere to take that misalignment that they feel and to have the courage to say, we have done an amazing job in the operating system that we were given as educators. So this is not an anti-teacher rant at all, because this is my 25th year as a public educator. This isn't anti-teacher. The teachers have done an amazing, amazing job given the operating system that they have to work with in their schools. But it's going to take educators to recognize that operating system is messed up. And we've got to delete it and install something new. One of my favorite authors on educational issues is a guy named Paolo Ferrari. And in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he writes, the oppressed, having internalized the image of the oppressor and adopted his guidelines, are fearful of freedom. Are we, as educators, are we fearful of freedom? Have we internalized the image of the oppressor and adopted his guidelines? Think about the teachers. How many teachers go into teaching and never question the system? They've just adopted the guidelines. They've internalized the image of the oppression that they're going to work under. And they live in this environment of fear. He continues in the book, education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of the world. That is such a profound statement. Either our public schools are going to facilitate the younger generation continuing on into this present system and conform, or it becomes the practice of freedom by which these young people can critically and creatively analyze the world and transform it. So either students become that cog in the machine, that piece in this hyper-capitalist economic system, or they become self-actualized, self-developed, independent entities able to critically think and analyze and develop something new and evolve and make society better. But our fears prevent us from radical transformation. It is our fear that prevents this from happening. Clinging to our individual and collective egos, we are scared to death of letting go. But we are dooming our children to a lifetime of misalignment if we fail to summon the required courage. Our new operating system must prevent alienation and promote true self-actualization. It must prioritize compassion, love, mindfulness, equanimity, nature, health, relationship, kindness, curiosity, humility, and interconnectedness. Success must not be measured primarily by academic achievement. It doesn't mean that basic reading, writing, and math skills are unimportant. It just means we need to have more balance. The success metrics need to be balanced. Academic achievement is one component of a successful education, but happiness, peace, integrity, physical and mental well-being, these are also important metrics by which we should be measuring the quality of an education. So we've got to rethink the entire structure, rethink the entire purpose of our public schools, and build it for humanity rather than industry. Because right now, public schools serve industry, serve hyper-capitalism. They are not serving humanity as a primary directive. Only through the good graces of, or through the good efforts of certain educators is it doing that. The end goal must not be to produce workers for a capitalist system, but to produce humans with the capacity to love each other and live in harmony with nature and each other. Because that's the other thing, is we are blind to what we are doing to nature. There should be a deep, when a student graduates, there should be a deep connection that they feel to other human beings and to the planet and to the natural world that they live in, and a deep respect for it. Consider for a moment that we live in a country where school shootings have become normal. In fact, I think I saw a recent stat that this March 2020, was the first March that we haven't had a school shooting since March 2002. Let that sink in for a minute. School shootings are normal. And what's been our response? Rather than examining the root cause of school shootings, our only ideas seem to revolve around adding more security. So we'll add more resource officers, we'll add buzzers, we'll add gates, we'll add more cameras, and that's our response to it. And there's even a ludicrous idea that we would arm teachers, that we would give guns to teachers. None of that will ever solve the issue, because the core issue isn't that we don't have enough security. The core issue is that young people are choosing violence as a means of communicating this misalignment. And no amount of security will ever fix that. If the fact that we have regular school shootings is not enough evidence that we are so far out of alignment, I don't know what other evidence I can present to you. Statistics show that 20% of all school children in the United States will have a mental health or addictive a disorder of some sort each year, and only 20% of those students will have their issue identified so that they can receive treatment. We have an epidemic of stress with teachers, with students. We have an epidemic of mental health issues with teachers and students. And this is a byproduct of a toxic culture. We have a toxic culture in this country, and it is reflected in our public schools. And we have human beings in there doing the absolute best they can within that context. So the new operating system I'm suggesting is built upon inquiry, recognizing real problems that plague humanity, like racism, sexism, bigotry, greed, hate, war, crime, abuse, climate change, etc., and then developing solutions for those problems. The new operating system refuses to rob children of their childhood by making them focus on arbitrary goals that are set by adults, because that's exactly what standardized tests are. They are arbitrary measurements created by adults with no input from students to measure the success of what the adults apparently are doing in the building. And even the adults, and most of the adults in the building had no input on that form of assessment. They're victims of that assessment just as much as the kids are. But the kids are having their childhoods robbed from them, stolen, literally, they're being stolen from, to play this game set up by adults. Who's going to get the highest test scores? Instead, in the operating system I envision, children have significant input into the design of the schools. Children are again allowed to play, they're allowed to nap, they're allowed to socialize, they're allowed to create. They'll spend a significant amount of time outside in nature. No longer burdened by a draconian accountability system, teachers will be given autonomy, encouraged to have fun, and paid commensurate with the great importance of their work. What more could be important than raising the next generation of students, of human beings? We should be paying teachers commensurate with the value of that process. And right now, we don't. Traditional hierarchical structures in this system would be redeveloped. So instead of having these traditional hierarchies of superintendent to principal to teacher to student, you can redevelop far more democratic structures, more holistic structures that allow input from all the people that are going to be impacted by whatever it is that you design, rather than it being a top-down model. It's like a circular model that parents and community members also have a voice in developing. School buildings should no longer resemble warehouses. They should no longer pack thousands of children. We have schools, even elementary schools here in South Carolina, that have over 1,000 children in them. We have high schools with 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 students. That is not an environment that produces intimacy, that produces everybody getting to know each other. It is not a normal, healthy human environment. We need to have smaller, much, much smaller schools. They need to be smaller so that we can be more flexible with them as well. And we need to include real choice, not this phony type of choice that we talk about. Under our current system, most teachers are tasked with managing large groups of students in concrete and steel cubes for a regimented amount of time, and facilitating their success on bubble and tests at the end of the year. That's essentially what goes on in our schools. And they're often forced to use specific texts, specific protocols, specific pacing guides that completely strip them of their autonomy. Teachers are more and more are being told to paint by numbers rather than being the artists that they could be. This is the game that teachers and their students are forced to play. Within that game, we have a lot of passionate, creative teachers attempting to meet their students' holistic needs, but the system itself was designed for the industrial age, for capitalists. It was and is designed to meet the needs of the wealthy who need workers. In truth, the students are commodities for this ruling class that needs both workers and consumers. But as automation and artificial intelligence will reduce the need for workers, we've begun to see the system collapse. We are at the precipice of a collapsing system because these wealthy capitalists like Jeff Bezos no longer are going to need as many workers to create tons and tons of capital. And because of automation, because of machine learning, um, this collapse is starting to take place and will continue to accelerate. Now, that collapse is too often blamed on teachers, even though teachers have been shut out of any meaningful capacity to transform the system. It's like blaming a football coach for a losing season when he never gets to call any of the plays or recruit any of his own players. You wouldn't hold a football coach accountable for a losing season when he can't call the plays and he doesn't get to recruit or develop his own players in the way um, in a system that would be much, much more fair to evaluate the success of the coach. We conflate good teaching with high test scores. There's an article written by a guy named, I forgot his first name, his last name, Allington. And he writes, good teachers, effective teachers manage to produce better achievement regardless of which curriculum materials, pedagogical approach, or reading program is selected. As educators, we've been brainwashed into accepting this view of good teaching, and most just play along. So we're in 2020, and I'm speaking mainly to educators here. What should be your role and responsibility? Our first role and our first responsibility should be advocates for a system that I'm describing or something similar to it, that we build, that we help build, that we have significant voice in building. So we have to be revolutionary in our thinking and our actions. We must make demands to completely rethink the way public schools are designed and the way they're measured. We should start with social, emotional, psychological, and physical needs. Any transformation must have at its heart an acknowledgement of the holistic needs of human beings. So I would like to see the physical structure of the school be designed to incorporate more outdoor and natural experiences, and we need to slow down. We need to slow down. I was thinking about if you've ever worked out, you've ever studied weightlifting, and you go in and you lift weights one day. You don't lift weights the next day. And the reason why is because your body needs an opportunity to recover from the training that you went through. And our minds need that similar type of rest. We need to slow down, or the pace is not in alignment with what is natural for our brains. And I remember when I was teaching, I was always told, you got to teach bell to bell. And I thought about students getting up early in the morning, earlier than their biology tells them that they would be comfortable. They go to school, they go to class, they're taught bell to bell. They're given a minimal amount of time to get from class to class. If they don't get there, they're tardy, and they go to the next class and taught bell to bell. They're given just 25, 30 minutes to eat a lunch and try to socialize, and then they're back in class, bell to bell. And then after that, they're in many cases going to practices or having to go home and do homework. And then they're graded based upon tests and assessments, and they're given grades that are relatively meaningless. And they are indoctrinated into this pace that is, we've got to get up and you've got to be at it all day, and you've got to work hard and get yourself ready for the next thing, because the next thing is what's important. So you've got to prepare yourself for the next test, the next grade, or middle school or high school or college or your job. And we lose the capacity to just have time for reflection, for mindfulness, for natural experiences, to slow down. The development of external technologies have helped us keep pace. But the brain, the wetware up here, has not been able to evolve fast enough. We can't put anything right now, anyway, inside our skull to adapt that brain for the speed that we're seeing. And these external technologies have got to be coupled with internal technologies. Compassion, kindness, self-actualization have to become priorities. We must feed our students and teachers healthy food and give them time to exercise, take care of themselves. And we must decouple testing with accountability and broaden our definition of success. So we live in an oligarchy. Let's be real about it. You can look at who owns the small fraction of people that control most of the wealth. The top 4 wealthiest Americans control the same amount of wealth as the bottom 150 million. If that's not an oligarchy, I don't know what is. And yet the oligarchy is driving our profession. We've got to say no. Not anymore. Because the needs of our students should be driving what goes on in a public school. Not the needs of people who have billions of dollars. But we've sold ourselves and our children a bill of goods that what our students need most is to compete in the 21st century, to be competitive in the global economy. I've seen that kind of language on district mission statements. This mechanistic mindset has got to be deleted so that we can install this new operating system that's built on love and a natural resonance with the human condition, so that we can then feel realigned. What's missing for so many students and for teachers too is relevancy. Because the only way you get students to play this game effectively is to connect them with the financial rewards that they will gain if they do play it effectively. But there's too many students who don't care about that. Some because they know other ways that they're going to be able to make it. 2, because some other students know that they are never going to win in that game, so they give up. And there are actually others who are actually thinking through this and saying, this is all BS. This whole system is a bunch of shit. And I don't want to be a part of it. But the missing component is a relevancy of feeling that the things that we're engaged in as human beings on a daily basis resonate with our deepest needs and aspirations. What is missing is the sense that our school lives have true purpose and meaning beyond what politicians and education leaders force us to believe is important. What is missing is compassion embedded within the system, not embedded within teachers, not embedded within students. I'm not saying that. I'm saying embedded within the system of education. So our primary goal and responsibility is to be change agents and insist upon public schools that are relevant, meaningful, compassionate, and human. We don't need more urgency. We don't need more speed. I don't even understand why we're in such a hurry. Look at what we've done to kindergarten students as an example. What has happened to kindergarten? What are we doing to young people? What happened to recess? What happened to art? What happened to playtime? What happened to nap time? Our culture is so urgent to move kids along and make everything go so fast and get them so far ahead so quickly. And why? Why? Is this what they want? Or is this who wants this? Who is it that's driving this? Because I know it's not the kids. And from the teachers I know, it's not the teachers. It's not coming from the teachers. So who is it? And it's not coming from the parents, because most parents I know want their kids to have recess and playtime and nap time and things like that. So where's this coming from? And I think the answer is found in our system of economics. Our culture has become about urgency. Think about the notifications on your phone. Think about texts and calls and social media posts and All news now is breaking news. Everything's urgent. Everything's important. You've got to call me back. You've got to text me back. You've got to like this post. You've got to, so much has become urgent. And our adult urgency is now being thrust upon children. And we are having them exchange their childhood because we're in such a damn hurry. We are so caught up in improving test scores and preparing children for their careers or college, that we forgot that they're human beings and they only get to be children once. We can't even let them relax when it comes to their extracurricular activities. Think about it. Now it's not good enough just to be a part of rec ball. You've got to be in travel ball, and you've got to be practicing every day, and you've got to go year round, because that's the only way you can compete and keep up. You got to pay to be a part of it. You've got to be committed to it every day for hours. And we're telling them that they have to invest their childhood, the only childhood they'll ever get, because that's the only way they'll ever be successful. And that is a lie. Yes, they may be more successful in certain things, skill sets, like baseball or cheerleading or mathematics. But why do we so narrowly define the experience of being human by these little skill sets? I'm not anti-sports. I love sports. I'm not anti-math. I love math. But allow it to proceed at a natural pace. Allow students to learn and grow at a natural pace, and don't force your adult goals on them. We have become a species. This isn't just an American problem. We've become a species so out of alignment with our nature due to our incessant need to view everything as urgent. I would argue that we need to do exactly the opposite. We need to slow down and frickin' relax. Redevelop society in a way that is more in harmony with our biology, our neural networks, and with nature. There's times to be urgent, but I'm positive that more urgency is not what our students need. Our failure to see this is resulting in a whole host of psychological issues. Our children are suffering from anxiety, from depression. Suicide is on the rise. Maybe instead of thinking about things as urgent, we just prioritize. And what we should prioritize is what every human being wants: to be happy and to be well. That's what we want. We're not going to find that in buying a fancy new car or a bigger house or any other commodity. You find that when you purchase those things, that there's that temporary bump of happiness, but it doesn't bring any lasting joy, any lasting wellness. You can't buy more time. You can't buy happiness. You can't buy your wellness. And yet that is fundamentally what everybody wants, but we've been tricked into thinking that it's materialism that will scratch that itch for us. What are the essential standards that make a student successful? Who determines those standards? Does the student have any say in the definition of their own success? My concern is that our students' time as children is largely shaped by adult goals and needs. As a culture, we all seem to be hurrying children in every facet. We have educational buzzwords like rigor, college and career ready, high expectations, and they're often used as instruments to make us sound like we're working hard with students. But too often, when you drill down on exactly what these words mean, they translate to just simply better preparing students to succeed on standardized tests. While I truly do believe we should set and maintain high expectations for all students, we must clearly define what it is we expect. We shouldn't be shaming and judging a teacher who's working hard but doesn't share the same vision as some bureaucratic entity or series of politicians. We shouldn't be blaming teachers. We should be empowering teachers, giving them the autonomy to know what they know works for their students. And we need to be training teachers to like Freire says, not just accept the dynamic that they're given, the environment that they go and teach in, but to be transform it. Our entire culture is obsessed with just doing whatever it takes at whatever cost. It's dehumanizing. It's in line with education reformers who insist we must put students first, which is one of the most cynical things I've ever heard in my 25 years in public education. We have these reformers who say that they are putting students first and that it's teachers who don't. This stems from an anti-union business model approach to education. It's an attempt to gaslight teachers into thinking that any student failure is their failure. Low test scores are automatically the teacher's fault. In this view, all test scores are directly related to the teacher's mindset, work ethic, and efficacy. Doing whatever it takes, and I hear a lot of administrators say that, do whatever it takes. What that usually means is that teachers should never protest or make demands. Get to school earlier, stay later. Don't critique the paradigm because that's whining. Just focus on students and stop being selfish. That's what, when they say students first, that's what they mean. It means teachers put your needs as a human being somewhere in a trunk somewhere. Because the only thing that matters is our success as a school system, or as a school, as a district, as a state. And what is that success? It's how we get measured on standardized tests. And teachers know it's bullshit. So we set up these arbitrary measures of student achievement and hold teachers accountable for the result. This was done to placate a public that was convinced teachers were lazy and incompetent after the release of A Nation at Risk during the Reagan administration. That system of accountability, which was poorly designed and implemented from the beginning, has become almost completely disconnected from reality. The content of what it is measured and the means by which achievement is measured have become largely irrelevant. In a recent interview, Noam Chomsky puts it this way. He says, the assessment itself is completely artificial. It's not ranking teachers in accordance with their ability to help develop children who will reach their potential, explore their creative interests. Those things you're not testing. It's a rank that's mostly meaningless. And the very ranking itself is harmful. It's turning us into individuals who devote our lives to achieving a rank, not into doing things that are valuable and important. I want to restate that. It's turning us into individuals who devote our lives to achieving a rank, not into doing things that are valuable and important. So yeah, we have to have high expectations, but we got to figure out what it is that we should be expecting and how we can properly measure what it is we expect and not burden teachers with the entire responsibility for rectifying systemic oppression, economic disparities, and social injustices. We've got to question the entire system itself. Thoreau said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. He said the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. Our inventions are wont to be pretty toys, which distract our attention from serious things. They are but improved means to an unimproved end. We know that we're out of alignment. For some of it's just this quiet background noise that we know is there. For other people, it is front and center, but it's there. And we don't want to come to the end of our lives realizing that we never truly lived because the treadmill that we got put on was not something that we chose, but was something that was instead chosen for us to meet the needs of capitalists. This doesn't mean we have to become communists or socialists. But it does mean that we need to reevaluate what it is that humans need and how we can start from childhood through our public education system in transforming the way we live our lives. Reimagining the purpose of our lives, reimagining what it is we tell our children about the purpose of living. When we are on our deathbeds and look back at our lives, it won't be the little things the hours that we spent working so that we could buy the new phone, so that we could buy new clothes, so that we could get a nicer car. And I'm caught up in that just as much as anybody else. But how do we get uncaught? How do we help our children not fall for the same lies and live a life that is not quietly desperate, but that is beautiful and wonderful and full of richness and meaning and relevancy and in line with our humanity? I'd love to hear your comments. Thank you.